Hello, and welcome to the second part of my paper, Tipping the Scales, a new understanding of food's power in the political sphere, by myself, Christian Reynolds, as a presentation as part of the 5th International Conference on the Interdisciplinary Social Sciences from the 2nd to the 5th of August 2010. I do apologise for the segmented nature of this presentation, though, being a YouTube presentation, it has had to be divided at the 10-minute mark. As I was saying previously, I have broken down how food is utilised by NSAs and by state actors into 3 categories: hard power, e.g. military or economic coercion; soft power, coercion via attraction; and also the power of prestige, coercion and signalling through food-related ceremony. Hard power is a contemporary application for the political economic definition of food. In 1948, Morgenthau introduced the concept that food could be used as both a political and economic force upon other actors through the application of embargoes and providing food aid. The Cold War provided a background for the evolution of Morgenthau's idea, with scholars such as Pahlberg and Hillman conceptualizing food as a form of economic weapon to be used against other nations, with the United States international food policy reflecting these views. The most commonly remembered food policy around that time was the Public Law 480, otherwise known as the Food for Peace food aid policy that the United States put out. It was used very successfully in Egypt in 1958, India in 1965 to 6. It is where the United States gave food and food aid to these countries which were seen as strategic nations for their survival, and in exchange the state actually shifted policy. However, hard food power does have its limitations. Pahlberg argues that hard food power is a commodity and thus supply-based. He applies that if other supplies of food are available to a nation that is being coerced through hard food power, e.g. through an embargo, that coercion cannot be successful because there are other sources of food available to the nation other than just the coercers. This means that embargoes and aid withdrawals no longer work unless the nation itself is food insecure, relying solely on the coercing nation for its food supply. This can be seen in the African case in 2002, where the PL 480 American food aid given was all in the form of GM crops. The African nations involved said, "We do not wish for your GM crops," and instead received food aid from the EU, which was not importing GM food aid. Next on to soft power. Soft power is the ability to coerce by making oneself attractive, so other actors will wish to emulate and become like the other. Sadly, this term is often misunderstood, with Nye, the father of soft power, admitting that, of course, Coke and Big Macs do not necessarily attract people in the Islamic world to love the United States. The Northern Korean dictator Kim Jong-il is alleged to like pizza and American videos, but that does not affect his nuclear programs. Excellent wine and cheese do not guarantee attraction to France, nor does the popularity of Pokemon games assure that Japan will get the policy outcomes it wishes. I agree with this. Change through consumption alone is not enough to signify that soft power has been successful in coercing an actor to change their behaviour or political stance. Just because a person drinks Coke, the United States of America does not have control over them. The drinker has to ascribe and be attracted to the values and ideology of the US due to drinking, or see that the act of drinking is a symbolic gesture. Food just consumed without ideology is just cultural propaganda. Soft food power must exert attractiveness that influences the way governments and their people act towards each other. I posit, however, that even the eating and drinking of another culture or nation's food is a power victory, albeit a small one. This smaller coercion and victory is not due to the attraction and the want to become like the other, but is just the acceptance and recognition that there is another, and embracing that by consumption. This is the consumption of cultural propaganda, and where consumption of the other gives the consumer knowledge of the other, and is the first step to soft power actually being effective, and I believe is a power victory in itself. Giving the knowledge of the other through cultural propaganda is accepted as part of public diplomacy, the art of selling nations, if you will, and has been part of many government strategies to influence others. In Arthur Goodfriend's paper, The Dilemma of Cultural Propaganda, Let It Be, from 1971, he talks of using private acts expressed publicly, such as sport, as a superior form of cultural propaganda. Food is one of the most intimate but public acts that can be expressed, with ideology as an undertone, and is a clear candidate for cultural propaganda. A modern-day example of cultural propaganda would be Japan's handling of its sushi industry, with the creation and abandonment of a sushi police in November 2006. This illustrates how much importance can be placed upon the correct selling of cultural propaganda. And in part, because we now also consume sushi and have a knowledge of sushi and Japan's whaling culture, are we now ourselves more acceptant of Japan's fishing practices? Other examples of cultural propaganda include restaurants and cookbooks at work. The act of eating in a restaurant or from a cookbook gives the consumer a greater understanding of the consumed culture. The act of eating starts a process of familiarization with the other, which can eventually lead to an ideological change and attraction to the other. As Can Alba states in his paper Food and Feast as Propaganda in Late Renaissance Italy, as far back as the 1500s, Italian nobles were influencing other European courts into mimicry through shrewd use of cookbooks and the description of their feasts. Usually, due to the variability in food's effectiveness as political power, the success and size of an actor's power must be judged post hoc, on the actual outcomes in the situations where food's political power was used. Yet there can be instances where the medium of food can act as a tangible indicator of an actor's power. Listed in Morgenthau's Politics Among Nations, the power of prestige is a form of power that shows clearly the relative powers of actors. Prestige is a vehicle for political elites and leaders to have interactions. Morgenthau lists diplomatic ceremony as an act in prestige that can enhance and illustrate the power relationships between nations, elites, and other actors. If a nation is treated in diplomatic ceremony better or worse than it believes it should be, this will cause power relationships to change and alter. Linda Morgan's dissertation, Diplomatic Gastronomy, investigated diplomatic ceremony through diplomatic meals as a source of power. A modern example would be when the G8 or G20 gather for their official dinners, with what is eaten and who sits next to whom, all being indicators of political power. It is the understanding that these indicators and determinants can be manipulated to alter the balance of power at diplomatic events and within the political sphere that gives an actor advantage over their peers. This can be seen in the current headline, the G20 seating plan, never mind the stimulus, who sat next to the president. This is the real indicator of where the power was lying at that meal. To conclude, food, first thought of as a simple item that nourishes and sustains the human body, has two much deeper meanings for actors in the international political sphere: the political economic and the cultural symbolic. The former integrating concepts of food as a production system, not just as a form of nourishment, the latter giving food other meanings that are defined through culture, symbolism and history. Together these understandings help frame food in the political sphere, illustrating how actors can utilize food as a source of hard power through food aid and food security, soft power through symbolic and ideological shift via cultural propaganda, and through the power of prestige via the diplomatic banquet. With this conceptualization of food's three different forms of power in mind, we now know that the Jacques Chiracs of this world not only need to watch what they say, but also who they give food to, and what they eat themselves, and finally, where they sit. Thank you very much.